Why is America so expensive to live in? Greed in the almighty dollar, that is why. You know, I wrote a large article about the housing bubble and the recent great financial collapse, recession, depression. Everybody blamed the banks, but you know who was also guilty? People getting loans they could never afford. Greedy real estate agents and developers who put people in overpriced houses so their commission would be bigger. Closing agents who gave the mortgage holder all but a few seconds to review their documents. Escrow and title greedy co's that did not effectuate the deal properly, and yes, of course, the robo-signers with the mortgage companies and the banks who let any loan go while their greedy ultimate goal was to simply adjust the rates and or bundle the loan securities up and sell the vehicles to other investors while most Americans didn't even know they had an adjustable mortgage. On top of that, paying for bogus mortgage insurance, etc. PMI, which was never there to protect the mortgage holders, never heard news about those, did ya? And last but not least, mortgage broker crooks, who damn well knew the consequences of the loans and clearly seeing that people could never make it got it approved. What does this have to do with your question? Well, everything operates like this here and it just hasn't collapsed yet. Purely, I am mostly reverting to the Olympic-size mess of the US healthcare system and all insurance-related schemes to include auto insurance. It is fucking criminal that most working class can't afford medical care while paying taxes so some fat ghetto trash with 3 kids has the best insurance possible. Car insurance, even the most basic, is astronomically high, even if you have never been in an accident before. The US has different costs of living from place to place. The cost of living is much higher in New York City and San Francisco, for example, than in many urban areas in the Midwest or the South. Rents in NY may be well over $3,000 a month while a house in Florida may cost under $100,000 total. This is not a matter of rural v. urban, but a matter of location you wish to live in. Most of the US has a cost of living way lower than the major cities in Europe. Orlando, Florida has a current cost of living about 5% lower than the US average. Ocala is more than 10% lower. Manhattan is more than double the cost. San Francisco is more than 2/3 higher than the average. If I showed some rural areas you would see a bigger difference. Yet in the UK, the costs in London are higher than most of that nation, and so on. America is not vastly more expensive to live in than other highly developed nations, and that is simple truth. Houses are much larger than in most other places, the supply of fresh food is better than many, and so on. Only if you wish to live on Manhattan, etc. Are costs so high, but even then they are lower than in many places around the world. Internationally, the UK, Canada, Australia, NZ, France, Italy, Benelux area, Switzerland, Scandinavia, Japan, and a bunch of other places including, of all places, Venezuela have far higher costs of living than the US. Expensive compared to where? The United States is comparable to other developed countries of Europe, say. In reality, I find living in California more moderate than living in London or other more desirable parts of the UK. When I visit other European countries like France, Switzerland, Denmark, Germany, things seem very expensive, partly due to the additional taxes, VAT, etc. on services and goods, and also the higher expense of employing people. The relative expense of living in any particular area is somewhat related to the availability of desirable jobs. Parts of the US like California and New York have many high-paying jobs and naturally costs will rise because the market will bear it. There are many parts of the United States which are relatively cheap compared to other developed countries. Look at some of the southern states which rely mainly on farming for their economies. The US as a whole is not an exceptionally expensive country to live in, at least compared to the developed world. We are materially lower than infamously costly places like Japan and Switzerland, but also France and Australia and New Zealand, while we are higher than places like the UK and Canada. The most recent data I saw placed us number 20 in the world, so not cheap but also in the same neighborhood as most desirable first world destinations. But as the US is an enormous nation in both population and land mass, it's worth noting that costs vary wildly depending on location. You want to live in Silicon Valley or Manhattan? Suddenly Japan doesn't look that expensive. You want to live in Memphis or a new Florida suburb? Your money is likely to go a long way. It's not, but it does vary a lot depending on the area. Some parts of the USA are very expensive, usually large coastal cities. People bid up beachfront and near beachfront land anywhere there's more than a few of them, or older eastern cities, which have a land shortage for their population that drives rents way up. Especially New York City, have a high cost of living, but living in the heartland of the central US or in more rural areas pretty much anywhere is fairly inexpensive to live in. San Francisco cost of living is close to 3 times what it is in Indianapolis. Even though both are similar in city population, the San Fran metro area is a fair bit higher pop though. Most of that comes from higher taxes liberals have imposed to support their pet products. Plus the coastal area, higher land prices in the San Fran Bay Area, lots of beaches in the area, driving rents up a ton. San Diego gets the same effect. When I was living there as was also about the same pop for city and for metro as Indianapolis, but the cost of living was well over double and has gotten a lot worse since then. Sometimes just moving 100 miles away can make a huge difference. Central Washington is much less expensive to live in than the Seattle area,